This is Dr. Hartwig, Medical Director of Nimiipuu Health. I'm going to provide some education about the COVID-19 vaccines, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding at the end of this presentation. Let me give you some background about Operation Warp Speed, which is a partnership between Health and Human Services and the Department of Defense to accelerate the development, manufacturing, and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. And their goal is to produce and deliver 300 million doses of safe and effective vaccines. In the development of the COVID-19 vaccines, rather than completing one step in its entirety before moving on to the next step, steps have been occurring simultaneously, while all safety measures have been met. The manufacturing is another mode that has been more efficient, and federal funding was provided to companies to scale up vaccine production before vaccine was actually produced. And the distribution is also being affected by Operation Warp Speed, as they are trying to deliver vaccines as quickly and as reliably as possible, and providing test kits to assist with administration. Operation Warp Speed has accelerated the vaccine development process as follows. In the upper bar, where you can see typical process, the research and development and preclinical trials of vaccine candidates are identified. This process generally takes about 3 months to occur. The phase 1 clinical trials generally take about 5 months to occur. The phase 2 clinical trials, which generally take about 21 months to occur during development. Phase 3 clinical trials take approximately 23 months to develop. And then the 15-month process of vaccine manufacturing was impacted, and the final distribution is generally about 6 months. And so the total time for development of a vaccine generally is 6 years and 1 month. Now, the accelerated process, which is shown in the bar below, you can see that the accelerated process, so the darkened colors of the blocks are purposeful. In the beginning of the 5-month period, where research and development and preclinical vaccine candidates were identified and phase 1 clinical trials are occurring, in the beginning of that 5-month period, the majority of the time was spent in research and development, and preclinical vaccine candidates were identified. In the latter portion of that 5 months, phase 1 clinical trials were being conducted. So that generally 8-month time span was accelerated by creating vaccine candidates immediately after the genome sequence was available. And one presentation from the Infectious Disease Society said that occurred 56 days after the genome was completed. And they also were using vaccine platforms that were developed for other diseases. So they had some platforms that they modified specifically for COVID that were already developed. The next 6-month process in the accelerated process bar graph typically is a 44-month process that was accelerated by large-scale phase 3 clinical trials of 30,000 volunteers, allowing for rapid collection and earlier analysis for safety and efficacy data of demographically diverse populations by the FDA, reducing the typical 12-month approval process to 3 months. 2 promising candidates began stage 3 clinical trials in July, with others to follow quickly in the coming months. Before beginning phase 3, candidates must show safety data from animal and small human studies. The U.S. government funding at risk large manufacturing of the most promising vaccine candidates during phase 3 clinical trials to ensure any vaccine proven to be safe and effective is available immediately upon FDA, EUA, or emergency use authorization, approval, or licensure. So you can see that in the typical process, the manufacturing is 15 months. That process, that brown bar, has been occurring since the end of phase 1 clinical trials. Manufacturing, because the federal government made some guarantees with manufacturers, they began manufacturing the vaccine months ago in attempt to expedite the delivery of the vaccine. Let's move now to step 4. So under the gold bar that's labeled 3 months, there's a typical 6-month process for vaccine distribution, and that's been accelerated by the tiered approach based on CDC recommendations, allocation methodology as part of the pandemic flu planning and COVID-19 response, and that's what's going to be used for vaccine distribution. As I previously stated, the typical 15-month process for manufacturing has been accelerated by planning for infrastructure and distribution before the vaccines were approved or authorized, and CDC is leading the distribution plan with the DoD via Operation Warp Speed. The typical 12-month FDA review for EUA approval or licensure is accelerated by providing continuous safety and efficacy data collected in large phase 3 clinical trials. And so each of the processes are being completed, but in a concerted fashion as opposed to an end-to-end fashion. So there are several phases of clinical trials, 4 to be exact. In the first phase, there are 20 to 100 healthy volunteers, and I'm going to emphasize the word healthy in this description. Researchers try to answer the following questions. Is this vaccine safe? Are there any serious side effects? How does the vaccine dose relate to any side effects? Is the vaccine causing an immune response? After those questions have been answered in phase 1, then the clinical trial, after safety has been proven, can progress to phase 2, where several hundred volunteers are elicited, and they are not all healthy volunteers. They're more representative of the population. And researchers try to answer these questions. What are the most common short-term side effects? What is the body's immune response? And are there signs that the vaccine is protective? If those are found to be appropriate, then the clinical trial moves on to phase 3, where they have thousands of volunteers. And the researchers try to answer the following questions. How do disease rates compare between people who get the vaccine and those who do not? How well can the vaccine protect people from disease? And then the vaccine in phase 4, after it's approved, the researchers try to answer these questions. FDA approves a vaccine only if it's safe, effective, and the benefits outweigh the risks. Those are ethical. That's the ethical approach to vaccine release. And researchers continue to collect data on the vaccine's long-term benefits and side effects. So this is a schematic diagram of the vaccine program phases of distribution. So each of the blue bars represent a phase. There's phase 1, potentially limited dose available, phase 2, large numbers of doses available, and phase 3, continued vaccine, and we shift to a routine strategy of vaccine distribution. On the y-axis, or the gray bar that is ascending vertically, the key factors of the phase 1 potentially limiting doses are that supply may be constrained. And you can see that the gray bar, there's a light blue label called trials only. So the vaccine is only available in the trials. And then there's a maximum availability if you move up higher on that gray scale. those are volume of vaccines per month. So when there are potentially limited doses available, such as in the trials only, and we have just begun to ascend the blue slope as it diverges from the yellow bar, the baseline bar where it's only in trials, the vaccine availability is only in trials, there's going to be a projected period of short time of when vaccine doses are limited in that upper slant or rise of vaccine doses. And when supply is constrained, then there's tightly focused vaccine administration. So we're going to focus on the various phases, which you'll see in the population of focus below, phase 1, 2, and 3, the various populations. In phase 1A, we're going to focus on paid and unpaid persons serving in healthcare settings who have the potential for direct or indirect exposure to patients or infectious materials and are unable to work from home. And I think of a lab personnel for that example. They don't often or don't have as much direct contact as a provider, but they come in contact with infectious material and they're not able to work from home. Our environmental staff is similar. They cannot work from home, but they are exposed to infectious materials. The phase 1B population or other essential workers, people at higher risk with severe COVID-19 illnesses, including people 65 years of age and older. And actually the ACIP released recommendations for phase 1B population, and patients over the age of 75 have been elevated to receive the vaccine because they represent a large percentage of our patients who are hospitalized with COVID and also have a high rate of mortality in that age group. So as the vaccine production increases, as the blue line continues to rise away from the yellow, we then approach phase 2 where there are large numbers of doses available. And we are likely going to have sufficient supply to meet demand. We're going to be able to expand distribution beyond initial populations. We're going to be using a broad health provider network in settings such as doctors' offices and clinics, commercial sectors like retail pharmacies, and public health venues for vaccine distribution. And phase 2 is going to focus on the remainder of phase 1 populations, critical populations, and the general population. And as we progress to phase 3 of distribution, we're going to continue to vaccinate, and we're going to shift more to a routine strategy where supply is likely going to be sufficient. They're going to have open access, which means that several public venues are going to be available for vaccination. We're going to have a vaccine administration through additional private partner sites, and then maintain the public health sites where required. So the population of focus in phase 3 is going to be the remainder of phase 1 populations, critical populations, and the general population. So the prioritization that the Nez Perce tribe has allowed, we have been granted the authority to determine our own priority populations when we selected to receive our COVID-19 vaccine from the Indian Health Service. And healthcare personnel and long-term care patients are in the first priority group. These groups have changed a little bit with the ACIP release, but not a lot. Additional priority groups are going to include essential workers such as teachers, law enforcement, paramedics, those aged 65 years and older, and those less than 65 years of age who are high risk with underlying medical conditions. Let me explain to you what emergency use authorization is. So this process allows the FDA to help strengthen public health's protections against threats by facilitating the ability and use of medical countermeasures during public health emergencies such as COVID. It may allow unapproved medical products or unapproved uses of approved medical products to be used in an emergency to diagnose, treat, or prevent serious or life-threatening diseases or conditions when there are no adequate, approved, or available alternatives. Almost every testing modality that we have for COVID is usable under a NEUA or emergency use authorization. Because of the pandemic, much like the vaccine, has not been developed in the routine fashion, but because of the urgent nature of us getting the vaccine out, we have utilized emergency use authorization to get the vaccine dispensed after its safety has been proven. So products must still meet the minimum threshold requirements to demonstrate safety and effectiveness. Additional elements may be required, such as safety monitoring, documentation, or consents, and the product can move to licensing later. For example, the drug therapy remdesivir, which is an antiviral medication during hospitalization to treat COVID-19, it moved from EUA to a licensed product because of its efficacy. Safety and monitoring are occurring with the vaccine. Passive reporting has been historically used, and that's called VAERS Vaccine Adverse Effects Reporting System. The CDC and FDA program is used to monitor the safety of all vaccines in the United States. However, with COVID, there has been a more active monitoring system that has been put in place called vSafe. It's a reporting system implemented by the CDC. It has new smartphone-based active surveillance program for COVID-19 vaccines. It uses text messaging to initiate web-based survey monitoring. It conducts daily health checks for the first week after the vaccine has been received, weekly thereafter for 6 weeks, then at 3, 6, and 12-month intervals. It includes phone follow-up for any clinically relevant events reported. So if you reported that you had fever or had severe redness and pain in your arm that did not go away, those messages, text messages, would be forwarded to a call-based system, and somebody would reach out to explore the positive answers that you provided. Next slide. So the COVID-19 vaccines that are in development are what are called mRNA or messenger RNA vaccines. There are 2 of them that have received EUA approval. The ultra-cold vaccine by Pfizer, the scientific name is BTN-162b2, and the frozen vaccine by Moderna, which is what we are going to receive, is mRNA-1273. The mRNA vaccines provide instruction to our cells to make a piece of the spike protein that is unique to COVID-19. So the spikes that are coming off the COVID-19 molecule are called spikes. And the mRNA has the code to generate a piece of the spike protein. The spike protein causes our immune systems to begin producing antibodies, which fight off infections, and begin activating T cells, which are a specific type of white blood cell, to fight off what it thinks is COVID-19. The antibodies also block the entry of COVID-19 virus into the cells because that spike protein is what allows the COVID virus particle to enter our cells and thereby prevents infection. Once our immune system has made these antibodies to the spike protein, it will be ready to fight COVID-19 if it's exposed. Nimiipuu Health will receive the Moderna vaccine since the Pfizer vaccine requires special handling at extremely low temperatures. Next slide, please. This slide is a picture of how nucleic acid vaccines work. So you can see at the bottom that there's an RNA vaccine. An RNA is often encoded in a lipid coat or a fat coat, so it can enter the cell. It abuts the cell membrane and is taken up into a vacuole, and the mRNA is released into the cell cytoplasm, and the mRNA is transcribed into viral proteins, and the proteins are then released out into the cell, and an immune response occurs because your body recognizes that that's a foreign substance, and there's a coronavirus peptide or a small portion of a protein that is presented by that immune response cell, and our bodies develop antibodies to that spike protein to fight off infection. Next slide. The COVID-19 mRNA vaccines do not take advantage of the process that cells use to make proteins in order to trigger, they do take advantage of the process that cells use to make proteins in order to trigger an immune response. They do not contain a live vaccine, thus the vaccine cannot cause COVID illness or disease. They do not contain preservatives or adjuvants, which are extra products, which is why they're not very stable, and the time span that we have to use them is very short. They are not made with eggs or any animal cells, so that egg allergy that sometimes doesn't allow you to get a flu vaccine does not come into play with this vaccine. The mRNA vaccine does not enter our cell's nucleus, and thus it cannot change our own DNA. It does not cause you to test positive for a COVID-19 illness. Even though the vaccine is new, the messenger RNA technology has been studied for more than a decade in other illnesses such as the Zika virus, rabies, and also cancer studies. So the general information about COVID-19 vaccine is that most of the leading vaccine candidates are a 2-dose series requiring a second dose at days 21 to 28, depending on which vaccine you're receiving. The brands are not interchangeable, so if you received the Moderna vaccine at Nimiipuu Health, the next vaccine also needs to be Moderna. Pfizer vaccine was received at another location. The Pfizer vaccine is what should be received to finish that series. Co-administration with other vaccines has not been studied, so make sure you get your flu vaccine, pneumococcal vaccine, or shingles vaccine before the COVID-19 vaccine. The CDC and the Infectious Disease Society of America recommend waiting at least 14 days before or after the COVID vaccine is received. And the duration of protection of the COVID-19 vaccine is unknown at this time. We're still learning information. So there have been some questions about whether or not we need to take this vaccine annually, and we don't know the answer to that yet. Next slide. The Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, the mRNA 1273 is what we're receiving. The developer is Moderna. The clinical trial status is phase 3. Actually, that's completed now. The enrollment of that phase 3 trial was 30,000 people. The study populations included high-risk, non-pregnant adults ages 18 to 90. Phase 2 trial is in place in ages 12 to 18, and that started in mid-December. And there's a very diverse population of participants in the Moderna trial studies. 37% of them were minority patients, 148 American Indian Alaska Natives. 36% had diabetes, 25% were 65 years or older, 25% were severely obese, 19% had cardiac disease, 18% had chronic lung disease, and 3% had liver disease. So the Moderna vaccine, tolerability and side effects, it's generally well tolerated. However, there were side effects that seem to be much more common after the second dose. There's possible injection site pain, fatigue, muscle pain, headaches, chills, and fever, which are not uncommon with other vaccines that are administered. Most side effects resolve in 2 to 5 days and were mild to moderate. Mild means no interruption in daily activity. Moderate means that there was some disruption, but you were still able to complete the activity. And severe is termed such that you cannot complete any of your routine activities because of the side effects. However, side effects are a sign that your immune system is working, so it's okay that you feel some of the effects of the after the vaccine is administered. immunity of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, the titers, so the blood tests, are 4 times higher than in patients who have actually had COVID-19 illness. So it's more potent, or at least makes a greater reaction in your immune system than your body normally would to a normal infection. Efficacy and effectiveness. Phase 3 studies currently are showing 94% efficacy. Only 5 people who received the vaccine have gotten COVID illness, more than likely after the first dose when they're not fully protected, and all only had mild symptoms. The Pfizer vaccine is the other COVID-19 vaccine, and their developer was Pfizer and Biotech. They're in phase 3 clinical trials. They had enrollment of 44,000 people. Their study populations were people aged 16 to 85 and were not pregnant. They expanded the trial to include ages 12 years and older in October of 2020. They had diverse participants, 30% minority patients, 300 of them were American Indian and Alaska Natives. The tolerability and side effects are generally well tolerated. Mild to moderate side effects for the Pfizer vaccine include joint site soreness, fevers, chills, headache, and muscle joint pain. Immunity for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, titers are up to 4 times higher than in patients who have had COVID-19 illness, such as the Moderna. And efficacy and effectiveness, phase 3 study results currently are showing 95% efficacy. Next slide, please. This is a graph of the cumulative incidence, so number of new cases of COVID after dose 1. The red bar is placebo, and the blue bar is after the vaccine administration. So you can see that the placebo new cases of COVID after dose 1 is increasing, and those receiving the vaccine, it plateaus and almost doesn't rise after the first dose is administered. So here's a table that compares the mRNA vaccine. So on the left is Moderna, on the right is BioNTech with Pfizer. So phase 3 studies, vaccine versus saline efficacy, the announcements of preliminary results with symptoms plus PCR confirmed infection. So it's 94.5% effective in Moderna, and the Pfizer vaccine is 95% effective. The safety profile, Moderna had most adverse effects were mild to moderate. Grade 3 symptoms included fatigue 10% of the time, muscle aches 9% of the time, joint pain 5% of the time, headache 5% of the time, and sight pain 4% of the time. And in Pfizer, the most adverse reactions were mild to moderate, and there were grade 3 that were 2% or greater, included fatigue and headache. So vaccine effectiveness versus severe illness, 100% for the Moderna. So placebo, they had 11 cases of severe illness, and the Moderna didn't have any. And the Pfizer had 10 cases of severe illness in study participants. 9 received placebo, and 1 received vaccine. So some people might question, is natural immunity better than vaccine immunity? Let's have because we need to make sure that we're weighing the risks and the benefits of the vaccine. So natural immunity, or having COVID-19 illness, is more dangerous than the side effects of the vaccine. There are potentially long-term effects from COVID-19 illness, which many of our community members have faced, unfortunately. And the getting the actual infection or illness puts people around you at risk for COVID-19 illness and possible long-term side effects. The vaccine provides 4 times greater levels of antibodies than having the vaccine. And however, the length of immunity of either the natural immunity or the vaccine immunity are yet to be known. Adults age 65 or older represent 16% of COVID-19 cases, but nearly 80% of COVID deaths. So let's have a look at this. So on the you see the ages in the age decades in the middle, and the percentage of cases to the left, and the percentage of deaths to the right. So you can see that the largest age group that represents the highest percentage of cases is 18 to 29. And the lowest percentage of age groups are 65 to 85 plus. The percentage of deaths are significantly higher in those 65 and older, with the greatest being older than 85 at 32%. So these chronic conditions increase the risk of being hospitalized with COVID. And there have been several studies that have shown that if you get hospitalized, there's a very high risk of mortality or death with that hospitalization. And asthma, the chronic condition of asthma increases your risk of being hospitalized by 1.5 times greater risk. Hypertension, 3 times greater risk. Obesity with a BMI greater than 30, 3 times greater risk. Diabetes, 3 times greater risk. Chronic kidney disease, 4 times greater risk. Severe obesity with a BMI greater than 40, 4.5 times the risk of being hospitalized. And if you have 2 of those listed conditions, you have 4.5 times greater risk of being hospitalized. If you have 3 or more, then you have a 5 times the risk of being hospitalized. So here is a CDC information about risk of hospitalization by race and ethnicity, relative to non-Hispanic whites. So the age group, you can see on the far right column, the rate ratio is 1. So anything above 1 is a higher fold greater. So if, for example, the non-Hispanic, Asian, or Pacific Islanders in the 4th column over has a 2-fold rate ratio of being hospitalized than the non-Hispanic white. Hispanic Latinos 0 to 17 years of age have a 7-time greater risk of being hospitalized compared to a non-Hispanic white. American Indian or Alaska Native have a 3.3 rate ratio greater than the hospitalization compared to whites. You can see that ages 18 to 49 for the Native population is the highest between 18 and 49 years of age. 5.6 times higher, 50 to 64 years of age, 2.4 times higher, those 65 and older, and 4.3 times higher than overall rate based on age adjustment. So we have a significant higher risk than non-Hispanic whites from being hospitalized. These are the cases, hospitalization, and deaths by age group in the state of Idaho through November 17th. So the highest number of cases in Idaho is the age group from 18 to 29. The deaths are occurring higher in those above 80 years of age, and hospitalizations, the highest decade is 70 to 79 years of age. So here are some frequently asked questions about the COVID-19 vaccine. Once I get the vaccine, can I quit wearing a mask, social distancing, and hand washing? The answer to that is no, because the vaccine is not a perfect fix. There aren't any vaccines that are 100% effective, and although these are very highly effective, especially when compared to the flu vaccine, which is about 50% effective, 95% sounds pretty darn good. But we still need to keep social distancing, wearing a mask, and hand washing until enough people are immune to create herd immunity, and public health officials say that it's safe. So we still need to protect that 5% that are not yet protected from receiving the vaccine and or having immunity from having had the illness. Next question, can I still get the COVID-19 vaccine if I have gotten sick from COVID-19? Yes, since we are unsure how long you will be immune after the illness, the vaccine will help increase your immunity levels and foster further protection for you and for our community. If you have had COVID-19 within the last 90 days, you may not be considered a priority, even if you are in a high-risk category while we have a short supply of COVID vaccine. Because studies from the CDC show that there are vaccine present at least 90 days in most people after having COVID-19 illness. If I get the COVID-19 vaccine, what side effects am I likely to get? So most of them are mild to moderate, and you may have fever, fatigue, headache, chills, body aches, and this may occur for 1 to 2 days, but the injection site pain may last up to 5, similar to a tetanus vaccine. Side effects may be worse after the second dose, including a swollen lymph node below the injection site, so in your armpit or in your elbow, because your body is wrapping up its immune system, making those antibodies to fight off the infection. So if I get symptoms, will I know if it is side effects from the vaccine or from contracting the COVID-19 illness? You'll want to discuss this with your provider. The timing, duration, and severity of symptoms will help your provider determine the cause of your symptoms. So if you have a fever, the vaccine can cause that, as can the infection. Fatigue, again, both can cause it. Headache, both can cause it. Chills, both can cause it. Body aches, both can cause it. But if you're losing taste or smell, the vaccine cannot contribute to that. Shortness of breath vaccine will not contribute to that. Cough, the vaccine will not contribute to that. Sore throat, runny nose, the vaccine will not contribute to that. And a swollen lymph node, only the vaccine will contribute to that. So the problem is that many patients may hesitate to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Studies show that only 58% of the general public said that they would receive the COVID-19 vaccine, and that was as of October 2020 Harris poll. So factors weighing on acceptance of the vaccine are there side effects? How does it work? Is it safe? How much does it cost? And those who are agreeing to receive the vaccine, they're more acceptable if the healthcare team said it was safe, if it was not a cost to the individual, which COVID vaccines are not a cost to the individual. It would help get back to school or work quicker, and they are easy to get. Now, I'm very thankful that we are receiving vaccine on the Nez Perce Reservation in rural Idaho, and we're going to get all of you vaccines as quickly as we can. And we need to know that we are the leaders, and we need to gain confidence in our knowledge about these vaccines so we can provide accurate information from our community as they look to us for guidance and information. And I want to thank you for your time in allowing me to provide some education about the COVID-19 vaccines. Our planning is been very rapid as we are getting information almost hourly to prepare for this. I want to thank you for your patience in the community as COVID has taken over our clinic in many, many ways. Our staff has been excellently committed to providing quality care and being able to receive and prepare for something like a COVID-19 vaccine, given the newness of this vaccine and our being able to provide it for protection for our community is an exciting feat, and the science with which they're using to distribute it is also a new process that's very exciting and safe. And I look forward to receiving my COVID-19 vaccine as soon as I can. I thank you all for your time, and